Every so often, a helmet comes around that strikes the perfect balance between modern function and vintage form. So geniusly incepted and implemented that it serves as all things to all people with style and need. A helmet that can go anywhere, do anything, and look absolutely smashing doing it. This, the Torc T1, is not that helmet. It's not that the T1 isn't giving it the old college try. It's that, much like the unicorn, the perfect helmet is a myth, an aspirational legend that never has and likely never will exist. In helmet design, form and function are often at intractable odds. Hell, even function and function can find an impasse. You try mocking up a helmet that's as suited to 45 degrees as it is to 85, and let me know how that goes. Imperfect as it may be though, the Torc T1 is quite possibly the best full-face retro helmet on the market. I think the first thing people notice about the T1 is just how massive the face shield is. Not only does that make for a pretty cool look in my humble and often erroneous opinion, but it gives you an almost unlimited field of view compared to most other full-face helmets. I think that's one of, if not the most standout feature of the T1. It just makes everything easier. I can get so much more done without having to move my head. Head checks for lane changes are almost completely unnecessary. I can glance down at the instruments without having to tilt my head, and it just makes the whole riding experience more panoramic, and as an end result, more enjoyable. If you desire a bit more flair at the expense of some practicality, Torc sells 3 accessory visors, 2 shades of smoke, and a chrome option. Another feature of the visor is that you can lock it closed, and only closed? I'm air quoting the feature because, try as I might, I cannot find a single practical use for it. It's dumb. And I don't know, that's all I have to say about that. That expansive window to the world does not come without some baggage, unfortunately. One of the drawbacks of having a face shield the size of Rhode Island is that there's no pin lock insert available, meaning the T1 is not a cold weather brain bucket. I'd say it's good down to about 60 to 65 degrees before things start turning into a pretty foggy mess, and since there's also no chin curtain, at speed and cold weather, your face is going to take a pretty chilling blast of cold air, even if you've got the visor closed. Outside of aesthetics, the hinge is probably where the T1 stays truest to its vintage roots, and unfortunately in this instance, not in a pleasing way. To even call it a hinge is really using that word loosely. The face shield may open and close, but the T1 doesn't actually have what could fairly be described as a hinge mechanism. There's no internal LED hardware at all, it's just a tapped hole on either side, and everything happens on the outside of the helmet, and it's purely friction-based. There's no detents, just open or closed. Any position in between open and closed is maintained strictly by the friction of the fasteners kind of squeezing everything up against the surface of the helmet, and when those fasteners inevitably start to loosen up, even full open is not going to hold its place. And on the other hand, over-tightening the fasteners might have you in a place where you have to muscle jam the visor open. So the whole pivot system just doesn't feel, I don't know, particularly solidly constructed, but Torc will sell you a full replacement set for both sides for 20 bucks, so it's not actually the end of the world. Another place where the T1 excels is ventilation. There are 4 active front-facing vents, so that's 2 in the forehead and 2 in the chin, and all of them can be opened or closed. On top of that, there are another 4 exhaust vents in the rear that are passive, so they're open all the time. Just like with the face shield though, every feature does have its flaws, and specifically in this case in ventilation, it's the forehead vents. The little toggles for the vent slider have a decently kind of firm action between moving them off of open or closed, and they're almost completely flush with the surface of the helmet. On the go with gloves on, they're surprisingly difficult to locate. I find myself quite often either nervously riding one-handed while my other hand hunts for the toggle, or just having to wait until I get stopped to stare at myself awkwardly in the rearview mirror so I can see where they are. Now, I get why they did it. The chin vents those toggles sit out way further from the surface and are much easier to operate. But if they'd done the same for the forehead, the face shield would either just not open at all because the vents would be in the way, or the vent switches would immediately rip heinous gouges in it the first time you opened it. I just wish Torc had figured out a different way to make them work so they weren't such a pain in the ass. The lining is this kind of faux suede microfiber that's incredibly comfortable. It's soft and perforated, so on those really hot summer days, you don't feel like you're drowning in your own sweat. Now, I'm not sure how that liner is going to hold up compared to true leather, but you can buy cheek pad replacements for $10 and a full lining replacement for $20. So I'm willing to trade some longevity to not feel like I'm peeling my face out of a swampy helmet on a scorching day. The T1 is a retro-inspired helmet, so that also means the aerodynamics are not the greatest humankind is capable of. There's a reason modern helmets that aren't constrained by trying to look like yesteryear are not completely round surfaces, because as it turns out, bowling balls are not the most aerodynamic shape in the world, and that leaves the T1 with two related annoyances. The first is that at high speeds, if your bike just doesn't offer any wind protection, you're gonna experience some buffeting. It's not bad, and you've got to get up above about, 65 mile per hour-ish range before you really start to notice it, but it is there. The other is that with the visor up, the T1 will start to whistle in your ear above about 45 miles an hour. Now, it comes in 18 different colorways of fiberglass construction, most of which, like this Allegiance colorway here, retail for $269 US. There are a couple that come in a little bit cheaper, and if you're really feeling flush, there are two additional full carbon fiber versions that sell for $399, and all of those helmets give you both DOT and ECE certification, and the fiberglass construction weighs in just around 3 pounds. All right, we've run through the good and the gripes. So how does the T1 stack up against the competition? I could feign comparisons to other retro helmets like the Biltwell Gringo and Lane Splitter, the AGV X3000, the Nex XG1000, and the Bell Eliminator, but honestly, they just don't stack up, so it's not worth it. No, there's really only one viable alternative to what T1 has on offer, and that's the Bell Bullet. Now, they are so similar, in fact, that I'm pretty sure Torc just copied the Bullet as much as they could. Here's the thing, though. The Bullet starts at $429, and the carbon fiber versions will set you back north of $600. And for all that loot, the forehead vents can't be closed, and you only get one exhaust in the rear. Now, to Bell's credit, the face shield does have something that could properly be called a hinge, and it is light years ahead of what Torc has on offer. That said, other than status, that's about the only thing I can give credit to the Bullet for over the T1. But at $20 to replace, you could run through something like 10 sets of pivot kits before you hit the initial buy-in for a Bullet. So that leads me back to my opening proclamation. The T1 brings more to the table than just about all of its rivals, and at a cheaper price. It may not be a unicorn, but stacked up against a field of mostly overpriced donkeys, the T1 is a bargain thoroughbred that I am happy to have in my stable.